chance to say it again in the morning. Welcome to the 43rd Annual Philosophy Theology Symposium. Our theme for this year, year's symposium, is the great ideas. And as many of you know, the great ideas gained its popularity through the Great Books program. And the Great Books program was started by Robert Hutchins, who was the president of University of Chicago, and his good friend, Mortimer J. Adler. And Mortimer Adler was really the driving force behind so much of it. He became chairman of the board of the Encyclopedia Britannica that published the Great Books, and he developed the Philosophical Institute. He wrote over 50 books, and later in his career he began to develop these books with a focus on the common educated human person. In the beginning, he was writing for philosophical professionals, but he changed direction, and so many of his books then really become very accessible to commonly educated people, not philosophical professionals. And that becomes very significant when first he writes his autobiography, and then secondly, he writes a second kind of a continuation of that autobiography. And in designing this symposium for this year, we thought that it would be, one, good to focus on 6 of the great ideas in 2 volumes that he did called the Syntopicon. There are actually 102 great ideas. But in this particular book that he wrote, it's called the 6 Great Ideas, and we used those. And so on Monday evening, we discussed truth, goodness, and beauty. Tuesday evening. On Wednesday evening, we had presentations from Walsh faculty on liberty, equality, and justice. On Thursday evening, we then talked about the great ideas in the arts. We had 3 professors delivering talks and presentations on the great ideas as these were reflected in the arts. Last night we did something that was completely unusual. In all of the 43 years, we'd never had anything like it. And that was, we had 12 students up here on stage, and our visiting scholar for this year, Mr. William Cathers, from whom you'll hear later this morning, conducted a kind of Socratic seminar with these students, and those in the audience had the opportunity to observe and to enjoy how that unfolds. We also heard, kind of like bookends, at the beginning of the program from Mr. Cathers, and we'll hear from him again at the end this morning. Right now, it is my great pleasure to introduce 2 students who are going to do a presentation based on these 2 biographies from Mortimer Adler. And as a way of introducing them, and I'm going to introduce them both at once, and then you guys will do your own transition. As I get ready to introduce them, if you'll permit me half a moment, I have to say, and I guess you know from the program, that I will be retiring from full-time teaching at the end of this year, and having the privilege of working with students has been the great privilege of my life. And last evening, Will Akers talked about the importance and the value of teaching and the impact that it can have on lives. Well, my feeling is I'm only an instrument that it's really the truth about these great ideas that touches and changes lives, and that, and I'm using that word again, I'm just privileged to have had the opportunity to work with them and to be a kind of conduit through which these great ideas can be received by them. And the Spirit blows where it will. And so over the years, I've been so blessed to have so many wonderful students. And as I'm ready to go out the door, this semester and last, I've had the privilege of working with students who just consistently, over all these years, have been so great, so wonderful. These two are among the best, and I think you will see that easily. Going second will be Monnin. She is a senior, a philosophy and a theology major. Going first, and I'm introducing him now, he's a sophomore, and his name is Andy Zmecek, and he and I first met when he was looking at Walsh, trying to discern whether he was going to come here or go to John Carroll, and we've become, I would like to hope, fast friends through the whole process. He too is a philosophy theology major, and as a sophomore, he's got some bright years yet ahead. And so without further ado, please welcome first Andy Zmecek and then Ann Monnin.
As you heard Dr. Trapani say, Mortimer Adler wrote 2 autobiographies. I think this is somewhat rare. Why 2? Was the first not good enough, and what do you put in the second one? Well, the first one that I'll be speaking about, Philosopher at Large, was the big movements in Adler's life, and the general things of what he did. And then Anne will be presenting on the second
autobiography, which deals more with his education reform and then how he later converts to Christianity in his life. And I'll be focusing on more of an analysis of conversion and evangelization that he had with his students and anyone he really encountered.
There we go. So presenting on Mortimer Adler, the man. Now the title of his first autobiography, Philosopher at Large, that title comes from a poem written about him by one of his friends. And I really think it's got 2 possible meanings. One, that he's not confined as a philosopher just to the academic world, just to the academy, the university. He's a philosopher at large. And secondly, that he's a generalist in philosophy. He's just kind of, he's not tied down. He's the philosopher at large. But a step back before I get in fully to Adler. How I got to be taking this course. Like Dr. Trapani said, he was actually one of the instrumental people who brought me here to Walsh. And I'm not sure if you can recall, but this is actually the 5th course I've taken with you. It's been an adventure, a joy for sure. And through all of this, I've gotten to see that a lot of what Trapani teaches, what he's based in, is Aristotle. And Thomas Aquinas, who's based in Aristotle. Jacques Maritain, who's based in Aquinas and Aristotle. And Adler, who's based in Maritain, Aquinas, and Aristotle. And Mortimer Adler. And as was said, we do have a protege of Mortimer Adler here today, William Cathers. And so I've really enjoyed so much learning about Adler and his life. Especially a large part of my spring break was dedicated to diving deeper into the book and learning about him. And it truly was a joy. I wasn't really sure at first, but I've come to love him. And I look forward to telling you more about his life but realize for just a second the unique position I'm in right now. I'm presenting to you about a gentleman, and in the audience sits his protege. Right? It's like a couple steps down from the irony of the scribes and the Pharisees trying to tell Jesus about God. Nonetheless, Mortimer Adler. So, he was born at the turn of the century, actually 1902, in New York. And in his young life, he aspired to be a journalist. He was actually able to skip a couple of grades just because the schools were so filled at the time. And then in high school, he was not only editor of his school newspaper, but also his school magazine. Now, he was asked to kick one of his fellow students off, one of the members of the newspaper, off of the staff because of low grades. When he refused to do that, he himself was kicked off of not only the newspaper, but also the magazine. And at that point, he saw it as, why should he stay in school anymore? There's nothing for him. And he convinced his parents to drop out of high school so he could start working and support the family. And he actually then started working at the New York Sun on the editing floor, which for a man his age and with his education level was amazing. And he made good money there. But ended up leaving there and leaving that good pay to go to college, to Columbia University. He left because he had read about and been interested in the Socratic method of questioning. He wanted to learn more. He went to college for the knowledge. He wanted to read more books and be moved in the way that reading Plato had moved him. Now, at Columbia, studied well, did all these things. He was a very dedicated student. 7 days a week, he said. And when other students were putting in, 2-page, 3-page lab reports, he was the one with the 20-some typed up, single-spaced. And while he says, there was good work ethic, he later reflected that being so dedicated to his work and to nothing else left him emotionally kind of stunted at that time. He didn't grow fully. He also had an aversion to physical exercise. Right? You can really identify with that. Because of that, he got out of the required military corps training and did not get out of, but avoided the 4 years of required physical education and the swimming test. Because of that, he did not receive his bachelor's degree. And was still hired onto the Columbia faculty afterwards, actually into the psychology department, which was kind of his second choice, but he took it. And after being on the staff for 5 years, some of the professors came up to him and said, hey, you should probably get the PhD and finish these things up. And so he actually did do the experimental research to get the PhD without ever having completed his bachelor's or his master's. I think one of the, if not the only, to ever have done that. And on the staff, he enjoyed what he did, but his real joy was teaching those books. And this had actually started in his undergrad time. While he was a freshman there, they started the General Honors Program. They actually started 2 different honors programs. One was a more specialized, almost like our honors program here. The General Honors was set out to read the great books. And we've mentioned this a couple of times, but what are the great books? They are, and what Adler then went on to help produce, the great books of the Western world. So you produce different lists and say, if you're going to be an American citizen, these are the songs you should know. These are the movies you should watch. These are the... Well, it said, if you're going to be an educated citizen of the Western world, these are the books. These are the authors to know. Plato, Aristotle, Aquinas, Machiavelli, Shakespeare, Descartes, Newton. It wasn't just philosophers. It was all the subjects. Philosophy, science, mathematics, literature. And Adler's joy was teaching these. He got to participate in the program as a student and then got to teach them. And the structure was basically small class size, small groups, meeting with 2 professors, and they would read one of these books a week. It was a quick pace, and they would go in depth with it. And a big thing for Adler was that the professors were not supposed to be lecturing at all. In fact, he said it was ideal if they didn't know much more than the students. They're supposed to be learning together and questioning back and forth. Always questioning, never a lecturing style. And then as it became more popular, Adler actually helped out with revising the list. Because as more and more faculty came on, they said, hey, we want to see this book. And isn't this one essential? And why are we reading this one? That's not. So he helped to refine the list. Now, after being at Columbia for a while, he did move to Chicago with Robert Hutchins. Hutchins and Adler became quick friends after a meeting on working on a book, similar topics. Now, at Chicago, they were the young guns. Hutchins actually had become president of the University of Chicago, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Pathers, but before, or right at 30? Is that correct? Age 30?
Yeah, I believe he was president of Yale Law School at around the age of 27, and then went from there to Chicago.
Yeah.
So that sounds right. Yeah.
Amazing stuff. So they went to Chicago together, close friends, and they stirred up some trouble. They had a lot of things they wanted to see done, and they wanted them done now. And this wasn't quite so popular with a lot of the other faculty, but they kept fighting for it, and they did get many changes put into place. This also is what started St. John's College, because a lot of these people were talking about the great books and instituting this and bringing this program to the university. Said, you know, it's not going to happen here. And so they actually went up to Annapolis and started this at a military college that was going under. And it was at that time the only, and still remains one of the few, that focuses completely on the great books, great ideas. Adler was, and I'll get back to the great books shortly, but this one event really struck me about Adler's personality. He was invited to a conference on science, philosophy, and religion. So maybe something not so different to what we've done this week. And he was very excited about it. He thought, man, we're going to have real discussion and come to some real helpful conclusions. But soon discovered that was not the case. He had proposed to the professors there, all right, let's get a list going of the questions that we want to try and, if not find answers to, find out where our disagreements are. And they had told him, no, it's not democratic. We can't do that. They were more of what had always gone on in the past, of just talking at each other. He dropped out. He wasn't going to have it. And when he gave his reasons to the person in charge of that conference why he was dropping out, that person said, you know what, I want you to come back and present on that. So he did. And he came back and told all these professors why what they were doing was futile, it was pointless, that they were never going to reach any conclusions because they were not really listening to each other. They weren't open to changing their minds. So the great books. From the great books courses, it was actually Encyclopedia Britannica had been owned by Sears and Roebuck. That's a little, right? You're kind of like, that's different. They had eventually been acquired by the University of Chicago. And it was around that time that said, we would like to publish a set of the great books. Now Hutchins, who was president at Chicago, was initially against this. He was all for great books and the great, all this, but it was against publishing a big set like this because he thought, without the courses and the discussion to go along with it, they're going to become colorful furniture for people's bookshelves. He didn't want that. He wanted to know that they'd be used. And so he said, unless that could be guaranteed, it wouldn't be done. All right, so it kind of sat for a while. But it was later that year, Adler was working on a paper about war and peace. And he was reading one of the great books and thought, wow, this is an amazing insight. He had never thought about this certain thing in this book. And he thought, well, it's because I'd never read it with this war and peace lens. And went on to consider, well, what if I read other books with the same lens? And what if with other topics, I read with a different lens all these great books, how helpful that could be, but how time-consuming it would be. And that was the birth of the ideas index, the concept of the ideas index. And this is what eventually got the great books published. It was that for these different ideas, these different lenses, he and scholars would do the work of, you're interested about war and peace? We'll see this great book on this page, in this topic. And this author said this about that. And this, to get people saying, all right, they're interested in an idea, it gets them into the great books, and then we'll get them to continue reading. Now, Adler, it wasn't just a publication of the great books. Here, some of the work he was doing with the idea indexing. It wasn't just the texts themselves or the references. There was also the Syntopicon, which was previously mentioned. And that was kind of a guide to the great books and references and cross-references. It also consisted of essays introducing each of the 102 great ideas. All of these essays written by Adler. Really an amazing feat. The project was to take 2 years and $60,000. That's what was initially proposed. It ended up taking 8 years and $1 million. But it's since sold 1 million copies, and it's a lot of work must be put into the great books. Now, leaving Chicago, Adler went on to do many other things. One of the big ones was the Aspen Institute. So in Aspen, Colorado, skiing town and all this. Oh, so great books. More from Adler. He finally lost the pipe. It's like when he was a young philosopher, he thought it had to be philosopher of the pipe. No, it's actually not. So Aspen, Colorado. Skiing town. The gentleman there, Pepke, wanted to bring great books talks there. And Adler was all over it. Initially, they were talking to academics, so teachers, professors, librarians, lawyers. Someone came up to him and said, you know what, you're focusing on the wrong group. These people are already getting exposure to these types of things. You want to turn to the people with influence who've not touched these great books, the business executives. So that's what Aspen has then turned to, and what Mr. William Cathers has worked quite a bit with. Adler also worked on the Institute for Philosophical Research. Sounds official, right? What that set out to do was to find agreement between men who disagree about certain topics. What he intended to do was take those 102 great ideas and go deeper and find all that had been said about that, the controversies, and kind of compare and contrast all of that. It was a big task. And there has been some work done, but really, it seems only one idea got done to the extent that Adler wanted to, and it was the idea of freedom. And that actually took, I believe it was 1,500 pages, 1,300 works, 800 authors, this massive undertaking. And just the single idea of freedom alone took him 8 years to work on. Now, more of these big, great things he was doing. Encyclopedia Britannica was what had published the great books, but Adler never thought he would actually work on the encyclopedia side of things. He ended up helping out and being a big part of the 15th edition of Encyclopedia Britannica, which was called Britannica 3, because it was not just, it wasn't the typical encyclopedia that had been previously put out. It was organized into 3 sections, and instead of being alphabetical, which Adler kind of says is a easy way out of organization, he organized it by the ideas. So a little bit more about Adler, the man, and some photos here. All the great things he had done. He was actually married twice. His first wife, Helen, he was married to for 30-some years. They had adopted 2 children. He said it was just differences in what they wanted and whatnot that led to their separation. His second wife, well, actually, with his first wife, it was kind of they eloped during the summer. They got to know each other quickly, and they eloped. And it wasn't until that Christmas that they actually told their families, but it ended up being okay. And then with his second wife, she was much, much younger, and so it was, again, they weren't quite sure, people weren't sure, but again, ended up being married for 30-some years. With each of his wives, he adopted 2 children. And had, with his second wife, Caroline, gotten to meet with Pope Paul VI. So why does this all matter? Why are we presenting on Adler, the man? Well, I really think that a good philosopher, his life is centered around his work. And I think that has hopefully shown through. And this is really going to tee things up for us to then go deeper with Mr. Cathers and learn about the great ideas and why they are still relevant for us today. But really learning about philosophy and about Adler and all these great things has felt essential to me. The great books and philosophy, as has been said this week, is everyone's business. What does that mean? Will I be a philosopher? Will I be a philosophy professor? I don't know. But learning what I'm learning right now feels essential in the same way that health is everyone's business. And everyone should know a bit about health and how to take care of their body and all these things. And then a select few will go on to be the healthcare professionals, the doctors and the surgeons. But all of us are called to learn about and be knowledgeable about health. I would say the same thing for the believer and the faith. That while only few will go on to be theologians, all of us are called to be, or all believers are called to be knowledgeable about their faith. And so, like these things, philosophy. Oh, wait! Adler, I forgot to say this. Listen to this. He went back and got his bachelor's. Ended up when he was older, got over that aversion to physical exercise. He took a couple of classes, took a swimming class, and at 80-some years old, did get his bachelor's. So I guess I'll say, an advertisement here for Walsh, it's never too late to go back. Some of the few works he's written. Thank you for your time, and now I'll welcome Anne.
So I'm taking a slightly different approach, more so than just giving you kind of an outline of his life. I'm kind of starting at the end and working towards kind of where Andy left off. So later in his life, Adler had a conversion to Christianity. And it was something that, after I was reading, I got the sense that he was just really struggling with to kind of come to terms with. He really studied St. Aquinas, and he just had an issue with the proofs. He wasn't happy that he was trying to find God, and it just wasn't good enough for him. And so he just really struggled and tried to extend. And that made a lot of theologians and other philosophers pretty unhappy, but it led to a greater good. So when we think of evangelization, it's easy to think about the Bible thumpers that just kind of want to come and bump you on the head with the Bible and say, convert, convert, convert. And there's also a self-evangelization. So there's evangelization by other people, and there's a self-evangelization. And so I have different types of evangelization here. So intellectual, which is more of kind of how what Adler experienced through his life working with the great ideas and working with these great works of art. And then there's blind faith, people that just, they don't question why, they just have this amazing faith. Phenomenological, so people that have to have some kind of outside experience that just makes them know that it's real. And then eschatological, have a fear of what's going to happen when I die. I don't say Bible thumping because that's usually what people come at you with is, if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell. So, as far as Adler's basic conversion, so as a philosopher, he was very much concerned with the pursuit of truth. He wanted to know what was true, the absolute truth, and he wanted to define and make sure that the existence of God was understandable and that it went further than what Thomas Aquinas had to say. He makes this distinction between the philosophical God and the God from the Judeo-Christian tradition. He says that the philosophical God is acknowledgement that there is kind of like a first creator, a first mover, and that something created this world. And then also, like both of his wives, he was involved in the Episcopal Church. He started off in the Jewish tradition, but he was kind of like, what we say, like fallen away Catholics. He might go on Christmas or Easter, the important holidays, feast days, but it wasn't really, he didn't care. He considered himself a pagan, really. So his leap of faith, his conversion into metanoia, a change of heart. So this is what he writes to his wife Caroline, and this prayer that he recites as he's just very sick and he's very ill in his later years of life. He says, "Dear God, yes, I do believe, not just in the God my reason so stoutly affirms, but the God to whom Father Howell is now praying, in whose grace and love I now joyfully rely." And getting up to this point, he had started to actually give sermons in his church. He was just very dissatisfied with the way that preaching was going. He felt that the scripture wasn't aligning with the preaching and that it needed to be more intellectual. And so he would get up and his pastor would invite him up and he would give a sermon. And then his wife was like, "You gotta stop doing this. You're too intellectual. The people can't understand what you're saying." But to him, it made perfect sense. And so there was that ongoing struggle there. It wasn't intellectual enough for him. But then there was also this struggle that he defines that for a philosopher to follow religion all of a sudden restricts him from any idea. If he follows a religion, then the dogmatic part of that religion is going to constrain him from his thoughts. And so it's so easy to utter heresy when you're following a religion and you're trying to explore ideas. But when you're not, you have the freedom to just speak your mind and to follow thoughts more clearly. So I have this again. So much of Adler's conversion was an intellectual. Looking at the great ideas, writing books about the great ideas. All these things in itself, the ultimate pursuit of truth. Well, ultimate truth, the ultimate absolute good and truth will be God. And eventually, he works himself to that point. He also had a phenomenological experience when Father Howell came to pray with him, came to sit with him while he was in the hospital. He had this kind of this awe moment where this man is praying for me. He's praying that, I get through this, I live. And that phenomenon of him praying and that experience of knowing this love and this joy brought him into conversion. It wasn't necessarily the eschatological, although people did try. They said, you studied Thomas Aquinas, why aren't you Catholic? Blind faith doesn't really apply to him. I'm sure once he dove into his beliefs more, he may have experienced some sort of that. But to him, questions were always coming, always asking why this, and this. But it's interesting how he moves through all of these to then get to the metanoia, the change of heart. And it's something that's also completely ongoing. So at any given moment, each person can experience the intellectual, the blind faith, the eschatological, and the phenomenological points of evangelization, because this metanoia is never just stopping. It's continuous. So this is a quote from Adler. The ultimate end of education is happiness, or a good human life. It's a life enriched by the possession of every kind of good, by the enjoyment of every type of satisfaction. Now we'll look at the word satisfaction. And I want to take St. Augustine, who Adler also studied some, not as much as Thomas Aquinas, but he read his works and tried to piece them together also. You've made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. When I read his autobiography, near the end, when he's talking about his faith, he almost seems to transition his writing style. It seems much more joyful, much less critical. He overall just seems more satisfied and happy with his life. He tends to reach almost this leisure about himself, where he can finally take that deep breath and be happy with where he is and what he's done, and continue to live his life in a way and keep doing things that make him happy. So I talked about his conversion, but his entire life, he was an evangelist. You're kind of thinking, I know. No, he was a philosopher. Well, he was both. So my main focus in my studies of theology is towards ministry and evangelization. I work with 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students. I teach faith formation. I have about 70 of them. And what Adler talks about and his methods of teaching and my methods of teaching, I just couldn't help but align them. They seemed so similar to me, but just use different words. So Socratic seminar and relational ministry, I think those are very, very similar. It's not standing up in front of a bunch of people and giving a long talk. It's sitting down with them, asking them questions, getting to know them, exploring their mind. So a great book seminar and a catechism of the Good Shepherd and Why Disciple. So a great book seminar would be taking the great ideas and looking at them and examining the great works of the Western world and just diving into them to expand your knowledge. So Catechism of the Good Shepherd is used for little kids about up to 5th grade. And essentially what it is an active learning, kind of like a Montessori school, but it takes the curriculum of the normal faith formation and kind of flips it around. Because for a little kid to memorize the 10 Commandments, well, that's kind of scary and messed up. No kid is thinking about killing anyone. But rather, it gives them the image of the Good Shepherd and develops a theology through that, allowing them to become friends with Jesus. And then Why Disciple is one of the programs that I like to use occasionally, but it focuses on maybe a small video clip and then discussion in a small group, where there might be a facilitator that makes sure they're on track, but other than that, they're leading it themselves. And that's a picture of Catechism of the Good Shepherd. So this child right here, he's working with the parable of the Good Shepherd, acting it out and using the pieces to better understand who Jesus is to him personally. And then another word that Adler uses, which would be on the hierarchy of goods here, leisure. So a lifelong education. And then contemplation, the ultimate high aim of kind of the ministry here is where the goal we want to get the children to. So the Paedia project was one of Adler's later in life projects, but one of his most profound goals and something that just drove him in his everyday life. This was an educational reform project. And when I was reading this, I was like, okay, why didn't this take off better? This makes so much sense. Essentially, it took one curriculum for all students to get their basic education down. And so he breaks it down into just step by step how you can do this. And so it starts with a didactic instruction, which would be like a lecture, maybe on video. So when I use Why Disciple, we start here. We watch a short, maybe 5-minute video, and it might be a speaker talking about really anything. They range from like technology to salvation history, and then development and intellectual coaching. So some kind of skill that has to do with academics. For me, I hand them a Bible and say, use it. And then Socratic seminar, which is what we did last night up here. Understanding, asking questions, and overall having discussion. Probably my favorite time when I'm in class with my students is when I have What's on Your Mind time. And this is a time where we all sit in a circle, and I say, you can ask me anything you want. It doesn't matter what it is or what it has to do with. It can be about me, it can be about God, it can be about Donnie, or Dr. Longbank, he helps out in my class. It can be about anything. And they ask their questions. Sometimes they're really great. Sometimes it's, what size shoe do you wear? But that was every week. I'm not sure why they always ask that. And that starts our discussion. And sometimes it's really great. Sometimes it takes them deeper. And say the most profound things. But in this, it's an easier education. I mean, when I look at the study of theology and faith formation, we're not just picking out the Hebrew scriptures and saying, first learn about the Hebrew scriptures. It's everything. It has history, it has science, it has technology, it has every aspect. Much like this style of learning, which encompasses all the subjects, and to have a basic understanding of them all. And so, good, true, and beautiful. These have kind of been themes of our symposium so far. And all of the great ideas and all of the works in the great books, they all point to something that's good, true, and beautiful. And they all point to God. So whether or not Adler realized it at first, each time he led a seminar, each time he was in the classroom, teaching these great ideas, teaching these great books, he was pointing other people to God. So, still, as I was going through this autobiography, he has these great remarks on teaching and how you should never stop learning and how you can't really consider yourself educated until after you're 60 years old. That kind of stinks. But he says that for one who learns a great deal by oneself in the process of teaching others. I thought that was very, very crucial and important. And I wrote a small exercise after this slide. And then to enrich one's understanding of what one has read, one must discuss it with others who have read the same book with or without the guidance of someone who's a better reader than most of us are. And so, a couple weeks ago, I was leading my middle school Bible study, and we were looking at this scripture. For she, Lady Wisdom, is a breath of the power of God, and a pure emanation of the glory of the Almighty. Therefore, nothing defiled gains entrance into her. For she is a reflection of eternal light, a spotless mirror of the working of God, and an image of his goodness. Although she but one, she can do all things. While remaining herself, she renews all things. In every generation, she passes into holy souls and makes them friends of God and prophets. And so, as I'm looking at this with the students, I said, what is this talking about? My Spirit. They did not see that. Instead, they saw, this is talking about Mary. Interesting, right? I thought it was. And then they connected it further. So they took what I was trying to say about the Holy Spirit, driving them to give them the courage to go to reconciliation, make penance. They said, well, we need to follow the example of Mary. She was sinless and she accepted the Holy Spirit's answer of yes. And so we also have to say yes to the Holy Spirit and live by the example of Mary and repent. They took it one step further, something I had completely missed. And they turned it around on me. And now I see something even more beautiful in the scripture.
We have about 5 minutes or so, in case anyone would have any questions that you might like to direct to either Annie or Andy. And
We didn't know he was doing this. Yes.
Andy, you had up on the screen a Time magazine cover.
Yes.
What year was that, do you know?
Admittedly, I do not know.
why was he on there? Was it Man of the Year? I don't think so.
It had to be probably in the 50s when the great books came out. Right there. Yeah, it wasn't Man of the Year. But it was around the time that the great books had come out and there was all the controversy going on at Chicago.
Can you make out?
I am not able to now.
And the first is his name.
Hey, Billy,
Yes.
it was March 17, 1952.
So in 52, yeah.
The anniversary.
The power of technology.
52 is, if I'm correct, when the great books were published. That must be it. Yeah.
March 17th? Oh,
Yeah.
so today.
How appropriate. Yes?
So I have a question, and that is, in all of the reading that either of you did you happen to come across anything?
Yes. I was thinking about working it. I couldn't figure out how to work it in. He asks us to look for two things. My book is 350 pages. Hers is about the same. He says, well, there's this one quote I want you to look for. And another title. The quote, which I did find on page 215. Those who don't answer to the rudder must answer to the rock. And the title of the essay that has to do with moral obligation to be a cultured person, page 31. The moral obligation to be intelligent.
Yeah.
And then there was a quote on page 107. Liberal schooling of all people, completed by continuous adult learning after school, is the educational obligation that a democratic society must gladly and inevitably fulfill. We're not inviting you to continue your education. We're telling you it's essential to being a citizen, to being a person, because it is one of the real goods. Just as we need nourishment, we need knowledge. Wisdom, really. Yes?
Andy, I have a question regarding that quote from Wisdom. First of all, I was wondering how you happened to select that. And second of all, the age, what age was the group? Because that's a rather deep quote.
12 to 14, and many of them, they know their scripture very well, and so it was a challenge to me to find something to challenge them, and so I wanted something that was kind of out there. Recently studying with Dr. Seaman and knowing that the Book of Wisdom kind of has this voice of the Holy Spirit kind of running through it, but not particularly on set right there, I knew that maybe they might catch on to this is the Holy Spirit working with them.
And just real quick to throw some context, I believe that quote, "Those who don't answer to the rudder will answer to the rock," that was when he was speaking to the professors about how they weren't listening and, you know, really the great books and the great ideas and how, you know, come this direction, this is where we have to go, otherwise bad things will happen. Brett?
Just for each of you, when you were reading these autobiographies, what was one thing that stuck out to you?
Can you hear him in the back? Fred, speak up a little.
I was asking them what was one thing that stuck out and changed you and really changed your perception, both of Adler, but maybe also education and philosophy.
So what really stood out to me was his way of educational reform. Something that seems so important. It just struck me how no one took it up and could understand it better. It seems so essential that this would be better, a better way to educate people, a better way to have overall happiness, really, to have a general education of all sorts of topics. I mean, we're looking at the Declaration of Independence yesterday here. If more people were educated in this fashion, then maybe we'd rewrite it and it made more sense, and then we wouldn't have all these arguments.
I think what stood out to me was his encouragement to continuing education throughout the whole life. As we discussed yesterday, that the degree of graduation from high school or the college degree that you get, that's not the certificate that tells you you can stop learning. The only certificate that tells you you can stop learning is the death certificate. And then also real talk. It was amazing, refreshing to hear how real Adler was, and how sometimes that was much appreciated, and other times it was not well received. But as Mr. Cathers had said yesterday, that when Adler spoke, he did not mince his words. I kind of admire that, someone who is real, and I would aspire to do the same. Yes.
You said that he dropped out of high school, right?
Yes.
So not only did he get his PhD without his bachelor's, but he didn't even have a high school diploma. Is that correct?
Yeah, and you know what? He later reflected on some other readings. He kind of wishes he didn't even get the PhD. He said it was overrated. People put the PhD on a pedestal and say, "Oh, this is the standard. This is what you have to be able to be an educated person and speak on all these different subjects." He said, "No, that's not it." You know, many who don't have a PhD are going deeper and are having these intellectual conversations, and many who have a PhD are not.
I couldn't help but think when I was looking at that one picture with all the index cards there, that what he could have done had he had a database back at that time.
A little bit of
And
word
so much
processing.
of his emphasis is on books. I was wondering if in his, either one of the autobiographies, did he talk to technology and his attitudes toward technology?
My understanding of his attitude towards technology was that he really hated it. He didn't really give it much attention.
He was born in 1902, though, so I cut him some slack for that. But my book was I believe published in the 70s, so he really didn't talk too much about it.
I had that conversation with him, so that's not in the book someplace.
Oh, okay.
So, He thought telephones were a problem. You know? So late in his life, his son, he's like, get off the wire. He would still call it the wire. And his concern was social interaction. His last book was Technology, Master or Servant. And so this is a man who sees things long before we even notice. And so it was the breakdown of interpersonal communications, whether in the family, in society, and long before what we see now, people looking at their devices and not talking to one another, and that the pursuit of truth is communal, and that he said, reading alone is like drinking alone. It's a vice. It's one of the questions on the 12-step program. Are you drinking alone? And when you read alone, you can suffer from intellectualism. These professors isolated and studying and trying to get these answers. So that concern about technology was the concern of the breakdown of intimacy, that intellectual development. You have to talk to one another. The problem with the professors, I give my lecture, you give yours. But we discussed on the Syntopicon that Adler had invented idea indexing. He invented that as an editor. If you have a Bible and it goes into the back and you have an idea on faith, and here are all the scriptures on that. If you have an idea on this, so to be able to index. And so what he created there, I talked to him about this, that I could have this online, and you could take any idea or topic that you were interested in, highlight from his Syntopicon, hit the computer, and would print out passages from all of these books on that. I'm going to be talking about how that would be on freedom. And he could see that could be a powerful tool. That could be a powerful tool for delivering this. So I've had that discussion with tech people, and that would, of course, with his last book, that would make technology a servant, not a master. It would make it a servant if we could use it in this way. And but I will tell you that physically almost killed him doing this. And he has students helped him. He took students like Saul Bellow, the great novelist, was working on this. Saul, you go through and you look through this literature and find these ideas. Or Clifton Fadiman, the great publisher, editor. And so his students would go through. You go through this book and you look for these ideas. And the physical effort that he put in. Encyclopedia Britannica at the end said, we're going to give you a year off. You know? Where do you want to go? London. You know? They put him up in a nice apartment, he and his wife in London. And of course he continued to work, you know, but not at that pace. And so I think, you know, excuse me for jumping in, but that question that you're asking on the technology, it was how it can break us down socially. I think we see today what his concern was. What his concern was, you know, and he and I often talk where he lived in Chicago. He didn't move. You know, the neighborhood changed. He didn't move. Walk to work. Go out to lunch each day, talk to the waiters, talk to people on the streets. That philosopher at large, you know, you can learn from the students in your class. You can learn, people have something to say to each other. And so that's why I think what is taking place here today, this week, is so pleasing, would be so pleasing to him, that we're all in the same room and meet. And so, I think it's how he viewed technology was not just, he was old-fashioned. He really saw the threat. And by the way, you made me cry. Great presentation.
A wonderful representation of Walsh's finest. Really.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. chance to stretch.